The upscale restaurant in New York was alive with energy, a haven for high-profile businessmen, celebrities, and socialites who dined beneath the golden glow of chandeliers. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of polite conversation, and the gentle hum of jazz music set the perfect backdrop for an evening of refined indulgence. Every detail of the establishment exuded luxury, from the pristine white tablecloths to the meticulously curated wine selection. Navigating through the tables with an air of practiced arrogance was Daniel, a seasoned waiter who had worked in the industry long enough to develop an instinct for sizing up customers. He prided himself on knowing who was worth his attention and who wasn't. In his eyes, wealth wasn't just about money. It was about appearance, demeanor, and status. He treated those he deemed important with the utmost respect while dismissing anyone who failed to meet his standards. That evening, as Daniel checked the reservation list at the host stand, the doors swung open and a young man walked in. He was tall, well-groomed, and carried himself with quiet confidence, yet his outfit, a crisp white shirt and dark jeans, lacked the extravagance Daniel was accustomed to seeing among their usual clientele. Immediately, the waiter's lips curled into a smirk. To him, this was just another kid trying to play rich, probably hoping to impress a date or sneak into a world where he didn't belong. "Table for one?" the young man asked politely, his tone composed but unassuming. Daniel raised an eyebrow, barely hiding his disdain. "Do you have a reservation?" The young man shook his head. "I don't, but I was hoping to get a table." Daniel let out a small chuckle and glanced around dramatically as if the idea was absurd. "Sorry, kid, but this isn't a fast food joint. We're fully booked for the night. You might want to try your luck somewhere else." The young man, unfazed, remained standing. "I don't mind waiting," Daniel sighed, placing a hand on his hip. "Listen, I know your type. Some spoiled brat who thinks just because his daddy has money, he can walk in anywhere and be treated like a king. Newsflash, money doesn't buy class." Nearby diners began to take notice, their conversations pausing as they turned to watch the interaction. There was an air of discomfort at the sharpness in Daniel's tone, yet the young man remained composed, showing no sign of anger or offense. "Are you always this rude to customers?" he asked calmly. Daniel crossed his arms. "Only to the ones who don't belong here." Before the young man could respond, hurried footsteps approached. The restaurant's manager, an older man with graying hair and an anxious expression, rushed over, his face pale as he recognized the guest. His demeanor shifted instantly from casual authority to barely concealed panic. "Mr. Trump, I wasn't aware you'd be dining with us tonight," the manager stammered, his voice tight with unease. Daniel's smirk vanished. His mind raced. "Trump?" The young man smiled slightly, a quiet amusement in his eyes. "Yes, Barron Trump. And actually, I do belong here." Daniel felt his stomach drop. The name resonated in his head like an alarm. He had heard whispers among the staff that the restaurant had been recently acquired by a new owner, but he had never bothered to pay attention to the details. Now it all clicked into place, and he realized with sickening certainty that the man he had just insulted wasn't some clueless kid trying to act rich. He was the owner of the restaurant. The young man turned to the manager. "I assume this isn't the level of hospitality we offer our guests?" The manager's face turned even paler. "Absolutely not, sir. This is completely unacceptable. I sincerely apologize." Barron raised a hand, cutting him off. "No need for apologies. But I do believe a restaurant like this should be represented by staff who treat all guests with respect." Daniel stood frozen, his heart pounding. He could feel the stares from nearby tables, the weight of his mistake crashing down on him. The arrogance he had always carried with pride had led him straight into disaster. Barron studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with quiet finality, he said, "I hope you learn from this." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the private dining area, leaving Daniel standing there, his career crumbling before his eyes. Daniel stood rooted to the spot, his mind racing as Barron Trump disappeared into the private dining area. The hum of conversation slowly returned to the restaurant, but he could still feel the weight of lingering stares. He knew what had just happened. He had publicly humiliated himself, and worse, he had done so in front of the owner. His arrogance, the sharp tongue he had always wielded like a weapon, had finally cut too deep. The manager turned to him, his expression a mix of fury and disappointment. "My office, now." Daniel swallowed hard and followed in silence, his stomach twisted in knots. As soon as the office door shut behind them, the manager rounded on him. "What the hell were you thinking?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing he could say to justify his actions. He had prided himself on knowing who was important, on treating the right people with respect, and yet, tonight, he had made the worst mistake of his career. The manager ran a hand down his face. "You insulted the owner of the restaurant, Daniel, the owner." I didn't know," Daniel stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's the problem. You thought you knew everything, and now you've humiliated not only yourself but this entire establishment." The manager's voice was sharp, but there was an undertone of disappointment that stung more than the anger. Daniel exhaled shakily. Is he going to fire me?" The manager sighed, his expression softening just slightly. "That's not up to me, but if I were you, I'd start preparing for the worst." The words hit him like a punch. He had worked in fine dining for years, built a reputation for himself, albeit not always a good one, and now, in a single moment of arrogance, he had thrown it all away. The manager straightened his posture. "For now, you're off the floor. Go home. I'll let you know what's decided." Daniel nodded numbly and left the office, avoiding the gazes of his coworkers as he grabbed his coat. He walked out of the restaurant, the crisp night air doing little to cool the heat of embarrassment burning through him. For the first time in years, he felt small. He had always believed himself to be untouchable, that his sharp wit and confidence would keep him above consequences. But tonight had shattered that illusion. As he walked away from the restaurant, one thought consumed him. If he got another chance, would he finally learn to treat people with the respect they deserved? Or was it already too late? Daniel barely slept that night. His mind kept replaying the moment Barron Trump revealed his identity, the way the manager's face had drained of color, and the quiet but firm way Barron had dismissed him. Every arrogant remark he had made echoed, in his head, each one like a nail in the coffin of his career. The next morning he woke up to a knot in his stomach, his phone sitting on the nightstand like a ticking time bomb. He knew the call was coming, either to fire him or to summon him, back for a conversation he wasn't sure he was ready for. He hesitated before checking his messages. There was one from the manager. "Come in at 4 p.m. Mr. Trump wants to speak with you." Daniel's heart pounded. He wasn't fired. Not yet. But what did Barron want? To make an example of him? To humiliate him further? As the day passed, he wrestled with his pride. He had spent years perfecting his persona, sharp, efficient, and dismissive of those who didn't fit his definition of worthy. But now, he was walking into a meeting with the one person he had misjudged the most, and for the first time in years he felt uncertain. At exactly 4 p.m., Daniel arrived at the restaurant, his usual confidence stripped away. The staff watched him with quiet curiosity as he was led to the private dining room, where Barron Trump sat alone at a table. He looked calm, composed, sipping from a glass of water. "Sit," Barron said simply, gesturing to the chair across from him. Daniel obeyed, swallowing hard. "Sir, Barron held up a hand, silencing him. "I didn't call you here for an apology. I know you're sorry." Daniel's mouth went dry. "Then why am I here?" Barron leaned forward slightly, studying him. "I've read your record. You've worked in fine dining for over a decade. You're experienced, efficient, and by all accounts one of the best waiters here." Daniel wasn't sure if this was leading to a compliment or a final blow. "But," Barron continued, "you have a reputation for being arrogant, dismissive, and rude to anyone you think doesn't belong." Daniel dropped his gaze. He had no defense. "I could fire you," Barron said matter-of-factly. "I should fire you, but I'm giving you a choice." Daniel looked up sharply. "A choice?" Barron nodded. You can leave now and find another job where you can keep acting like you're better than the people you serve. Or you can stay, under one condition. Daniel hesitated. What condition? You change. Barron's voice was firm. You learn to treat everyone with respect. No more sizing people up. No more deciding who's worthy of good service. You treat the man in jeans the same way you'd treat a billionaire in a suit. Daniel sat in stunned silence. Barron leaned back. I don't want people working here who make others feel small. I want a restaurant where everyone feels welcome, where no one is embarrassed just because they don't fit someone else's definition of important. Daniel let the words sink in. This wasn't just about saving his job. This was about whether he could let go of the persona he had built for himself, whether he could become something better than what he had been. Finally, he nodded. I'll change. Barron studied him for a moment before giving a slight nod. Then you're still employed, but I'll be watching. Daniel exhaled, relief washing over him. He stood ready to leave, but before he did, he met Barron's gaze. Thank you. Barron gave a small, knowing smile. Make it count. As Daniel walked out of the private dining room, he felt something unfamiliar, humility. For the first time in years, he wasn't walking with arrogance, but with the determination to prove that he deserved the second chance he had been given. Daniel returned to the floor that evening, feeling the weight of every step. The restaurant was just as lively as before, filled with elegant guests and the rich aroma of gourmet dishes. But everything felt different. He could feel the curious glances from his co-workers, the subtle whispers that followed him. Some looked at him with pity, others with quiet amusement, as if waiting to see if he would crash and burn. For the first time in years, he wasn't the self-assured, untouchable waiter he had once prided himself on being. He was someone trying to prove he belonged. His first test came almost immediately. A middle-aged couple sat down at one of his tables dressed in casual sweaters and jeans, far from the extravagant clientele he used to prioritize. Normally, he would have barely concealed his disdain, assuming they wouldn't tip well or didn't belong in a place like this. But now he reminded himself of Barron's words. You change. Daniel straightened his posture and approached with a genuine smile. Good evening. Welcome. Can I start you off with something to drink? The couple smiled back warmly, and as the night went on, he treated them with the same care and attentiveness he would have given to a CEO or a movie star. When they left, they not only left him a generous tip, but also a handwritten note on the receipt. Thank you for the excellent service. It made our anniversary special. Daniel stared at the note for a long moment, something in his chest tightening. How many people had he treated coldly in the past? How many guests had he dismissed? Because of his own prejudice? The days turned into weeks, and Daniel slowly rebuilt his reputation, not as the arrogant, sharp-tongued waiter, but as someone who genuinely cared about the experience of every guest. It wasn't always easy. There were times when his old instincts kicked in, moments when he almost slipped back into his habits. But then he would remember the quiet way Barron had given him a choice, and he would correct himself. One evening, as he cleared a table, the manager approached him. There was no anger or disappointment in his face this time, just a quiet nod of approval. Good work, Daniel, he said simply before walking away. The compliment was small, but it meant more than any praise Daniel had received before. Later that night, as the restaurant emptied, Daniel found himself walking past the private dining area where Barron often sat. To his surprise, Barron glanced up from his table and met his eyes. Daniel hesitated before giving a small nod of gratitude. Barron returned the nod, a satisfied look in his eyes, before returning to his meal. No words were needed. Daniel had learned the lesson, and this time he wasn't going to forget it.